Today marks 48 years since Jimmy Hoffa, a controversial American labor leader, suddenly disappeared in Metro Detroit.
It's one of the biggest mysteries in American history. What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Hard to believe, but it's been nearly 5 decades. We're talking 50 years since the labor leader vanished.
On the morning of July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa, one of the most powerful and polarizing labor figures in American history, left his modest home in Lake Orion, Michigan, wearing a navy blazer and white shirt, his signature slicked-back hair immaculate. He was headed to a meeting at the upscale Machus Red Fox Restaurant in Bloomfield Hills, reportedly with 2 known mob associates, but he never returned home. By evening, his maroon 1974 Lincoln Continental was found abandoned in the restaurant's parking lot with no sign of Hoffa, no struggle, and none of his personal belongings, briefcase, wallet, or keys, inside. The vehicle was cold, and the scene was so devoid of evidence that investigators were stunned. No footprints, no surveillance footage, no eyewitnesses, nothing. Hoffa had disappeared in broad daylight, in public, with eerie precision. The case quickly made national headlines, captivating the country and baffling authorities. Within 24 hours, what began as a missing persons report became the foundation for one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, launching decades of speculation and media obsession with what really happened to the legendary Union leader. Hoffa's powerful legacy and dangerous alliances. Jimmy Hoffa's rise from a poor child in Brazil, Indiana, to president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters was a story as American as it was controversial. Orphaned at a young age, Hoffa found his footing early in labor organizing, eventually ascending to lead the Teamsters in 1957. Under his leadership, the union grew into a political juggernaut, representing over 2 million members and securing unprecedented wages and benefits. But Hoffa's legacy was shadowed by his willingness to work with organized crime to gain and retain power. These relationships helped him enforce loyalty and push through contracts, but also drew intense scrutiny from the federal government. In 1967, he was convicted of jury tampering and fraud, landing him in prison for a 13-year sentence. President Nixon commuted his sentence in 1971 on the condition that he would not engage in union activity until 1980. Hoffa ignored the restriction and began maneuvering to regain his position, threatening the power structures built during his absence. As Hoffa tried to reclaim control, he not only reignited tensions with former mob allies but also endangered long-standing deals between the Union and the underworld. His bold defiance set off alarm bells in the very circles that had once helped him rise, making his reemergence not just inconvenient, but potentially catastrophic for those in power. The long trail of false leads. In the years following Hoffa's disappearance, countless investigations, tips, and excavations have been launched, all in search of a body that seemed determined to stay hidden. From New Jersey to Michigan, every rumor sparked a new search, often with dramatic media attention but no results. The most notable was the 2006 FBI excavation at Hidden Dreams Horse Farm in Milford Township, prompted by an anonymous tip that Hoffa had been buried under a barn. Teams of forensic experts, cadaver dogs, and national reporters descended on the property, but after days of digging, nothing was found. The search ended like many before it, empty-handed. Yet the public's fascination with Hoffa only grew. Books, TV specials, and podcasts kept the mystery alive, while fictional portrayals like Martin Scorsese's The Irishman blurred the line between fact and speculation. Every anniversary of his disappearance revived media interest and speculation, as Hoffa's vanishing act came to symbolize not just a missing man, but the enduring power of organized crime, corruption, and cover-ups in American society. The lack of closure gave the case mythical status, and in the absence of definitive answers, the legend of Hoffa only deepened. The mysterious Ace of Spades, one of the most bizarre and potentially significant clues in the Hoffa case, came decades later in the form of a playing card. A worn Ace of Spades discovered among the belongings of a deceased Wisconsin police officer with known ties to organized crime. Scrawled on it were the words, "Milwaukee Third Base, Old Stadium, 1995. This seemingly cryptic message was turned over to the Casebreakers, a volunteer team of retired law enforcement intelligence officers and forensic experts who specialize in solving cold cases. Intrigued, the group used satellite imagery from the 1990s to identify soil anomalies near where third base once stood at Milwaukee County Stadium, demolished in 2001. Ground-penetrating radar scans revealed a compacted clay layer beneath the surface, suggesting the area had been deliberately disturbed and refilled. The site had since become part of a community sports complex, raising legal and ethical challenges about whether it could be excavated. Nonetheless, the evidence was compelling enough to draw national attention. Unlike previous leads built on hearsay, this one had tangible data, coordinates, geological disruptions, and now a canine alert that pointed to potential human remains. It was the first lead in years to combine historical context with modern forensic technology. Cadaver dog signals. Possible remains. Further investigation of the old Milwaukee Stadium site brought in a cadaver dog named Moxie, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. Under the guidance of retired officer Karen Corcoran, Moxie alerted 4 separate times to the same exact spot, near where third base once stood. These alerts were not prompted by any prior exposure or training related to the case, suggesting that the dog was independently reacting to an unknown source. The Casebreakers, already interested due to the playing card and radar anomalies, considered this a major breakthrough. The dog's behavior added biological credibility to the existing geological clues. Together, the evidence pointed to a strong possibility that something, or someone, had been buried at that location. However, due to the site's current use as a youth baseball diamond and the public nature of the property, neither local nor federal authorities approved an excavation. Instead, the Casebreakers proposed a minimally invasive soil sampling procedure to test for signs of human decomposition. This suggestion remains pending, but the convergence of clues, the card, the radar data, and Moxie's alerts has created one of the most compelling leads in decades. It's not just another theory, it's a triangulation of evidence demanding further action. Here is the continuation of the rewritten script from a third-person perspective, with each point written as a 1,500-character single paragraph. Forensic dating suggests a 1995 burial. The most shocking development in the Milwaukee Stadium investigation came not from the ground-penetrating radar or cadaver dog alerts, but from the forensic dating analysis conducted on the disturbed site. Laboratory tests of the clay and surrounding material revealed that the area had likely been manipulated around 95, 2 decades after Hoffa's disappearance. This revelation turned the case upside down. It challenged the long-standing theory that Hoffa had been killed and buried immediately after his 1975 disappearance. Instead, it suggested that his body had been stored or hidden elsewhere for 20 years before being reburied beneath what would become a youth baseball diamond. This timeline shift raised profound implications. If someone moved Hoffa's remains in the mid-1990s, it meant individuals with knowledge of his murder were still alive and working to conceal the crime decades later. Such an act would have required coordination, influence, and access, hinting at an enduring network of protection around the case. Whether the reburial was motivated by fear, guilt, or a desire to permanently erase the trail, the forensic timeline painted a picture of a conspiracy that not only survived Hoffa's death, but actively evolved to stay one step ahead of justice. The location choice, a site scheduled for demolition, further underscored the strategic thinking involved in hiding his remains. Implications of a delayed burial. The idea that Jimmy Hoffa's body may have been moved and reburied 2 decades after his presumed murder casts a long shadow over every previous theory. If this reburial occurred in 1995, it implies that a small circle of conspirators remained actively involved long after the initial crime, maintaining secrecy across generations. The coordination required to move Hoffa's body undetected, particularly during the demolition and reconstruction of a major stadium, would have necessitated significant influence in both political and labor circles. It also raises questions about what those individuals were trying to protect. Were they shielding themselves, their families, or larger institutions such as the Teamsters or organized crime networks? The location itself, a sports facility constantly in public use, suggests a level of audacity and calculation designed to render the burial site both obvious and inaccessible. Choosing a location that would soon be buried under layers of concrete and recreation could have been seen as the perfect long-term cover. Yet, ironically, it was this very location that modern forensic tools would one day scrutinize. The idea that Hoffa's killers, or their allies, might have moved his body to avoid scrutiny just as technology was catching up speaks to the complexity of a cover-up designed not just to erase a man, but to obliterate every trace of his story. New eyewitness adds credibility. Nearly 50 years after Hoffa vanished, a new and unexpected witness has come forward with a claim that could fundamentally reshape the narrative. In the book, The Last Mob Lawyer, veteran attorney Chris Franzlau recounts an encounter with a man named Jeff, who says he witnessed a body being buried near the Pulaski Skyway in Jersey City in 1975. Jeff, a young man at the time, was helping his father excavate a site when 2 cars arrived. One, a black Cadillac with Michigan plates. He described watching several men remove a body from the trunk and bury it in a freshly dug grave, allegedly treating it with chemicals to speed decomposition or suppress detection. Jeff's account lends weight to a long-rumored theory that Hoffa's body had been chemically treated to prevent discovery. While the site hasn't yet been excavated and physical evidence remains absent, Jeff's claim is the first from a named eyewitness with specific details about a burial event that aligns with historical suspicions. When asked why he remained silent for decades, Jeff simply said, "Everybody's dead now." His fear of mob retaliation had kept him quiet, but with time and death thinning the ranks of those involved, he felt safe to speak. His testimony now injects new urgency into a case once thought to be beyond the reach of truth. A campaign to clear Gabe Briguglio. For decades, Gabe Briguglio has lived under the cloud of suspicion in Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, despite never being charged or convicted. Now 85 years old, Briguglio has a powerful advocate in Congressman Jeff Van Drew, who is calling for a formal exoneration by the U.S. Department of Justice. Van Drew argues that the case against Briguglio was built entirely on the testimony of Ralph Picardo, a convicted killer and jailhouse informant whose credibility crumbled under scrutiny. Picardo admitted that he had no direct knowledge of the crime, merely speculating about who might have been involved. Despite this, his statements fueled media headlines, grand jury investigations, and decades of public suspicion. Briguglio insists he was in New Jersey with family on the day of Hoffa's disappearance and had no involvement with the mafia. His only connection to Tony Provenzano, a known mob figure, was through legitimate Teamsters business. Yet he's been portrayed in documentaries and films as a key conspirator. His daughter Yona has spoken emotionally about the toll this suspicion has taken on their family. Van Drew calls this a miscarriage of justice and a failure of due process, urging officials to clear Bergoglio's name so that he can live out his remaining years without the burden of an unproven accusation haunting his legacy. Old theories versus new evidence. For years, the most persistent theory surrounding Hoffa's disappearance was that he was murdered and dissolved in a vat of acid at a Detroit factory. The idea, appealing for its brutal finality, appeared in multiple documentaries and books, often supported by anonymous sources or unverified mob anecdotes. However, this theory has never been substantiated by forensic evidence, and no trace of Hoffa has ever been found in connection with it. In contrast, the Milwaukee discovery offers concrete, measurable findings. A playing card with mob ties, radar-confirmed soil disturbances, and multiple alerts from a trained cadaver dog. Unlike previous rumors, this lead doesn't rely on speculation. It's grounded in science. The contrast between myth and evidence couldn't be clearer. While internet conspiracy videos continue to go viral with sensational claims about chemical disposal and secret recordings, real investigators are focusing on data-driven discoveries. The Milwaukee site stands as the first lead in decades to bridge historical narrative with forensic reality. If the site yields remains, it would not only solve one of America's greatest cold cases, but dismantle the legends built on fiction. It would replace mystery with truth, and finally bring Jimmy Hoffa's story to an end rooted in fact, not folklore.